He promised his little girl ice cream if today went right, but now he stood on the sidewalk staring at the paper bag in his empty hand. The interview had slipped through his fingers like all the others. And just as he turned to walk away, someone from that room came running after him. Ethan Miller adjusted the collar of his worn-out navy blue shirt for the third time that morning. The fabric was frayed at the cuffs, the stitching a little loose at the shoulder, but it was the best shirt he owned. He had pressed it carefully with an old iron that hissed more than it steamed, determined to make it look presentable. In the bathroom mirror, cracked in the corner and spotted with age, he had rehearsed answers to questions he feared he would forget once he sat across from the panel. He remembered the way Lily had peeked her head through the doorway while he muttered lines to himself, her wide brown eyes full of a confidence he no longer felt. "Daddy, you're going to get this job. I know it." She had said it with the kind of certainty only a child could muster, a certainty that had the power to push back the darkness he carried inside. He had smiled at her, tucking one of her pigtails behind her ear, and promised, "I'll do my best, sweetheart." But now, standing in front of the towering glass building, he wondered if his best would be enough. The morning air still clung to his shirt, cool and damp, though his palms were already slick with sweat. He wiped them against his pants, leaving faint streaks on the fabric, and gripped the folder under his arm so tightly that the corners had begun to bend. Inside the lobby, the floor gleamed like water, reflecting the polished shoes of men who looked like they belonged there. Their suits were tailored, their ties knotted with precision. Ethan caught sight of himself in the reflection, his tired eyes, the lines etched by too many sleepless nights, and he forced his shoulders back as though posture alone could mask his weariness. He sat in the waiting area, trying not to fidget, but every tick of the wall clock above the receptionist's desk pounded against his chest. The voices around him buzzed with small talk, discussions about investment portfolios, recent conferences, and industry trends Ethan barely understood. He stayed silent, staring at the folder in his lap, repeating in his head the simple truths of his story. "I worked hard. I led a team. I kept going when others gave up." It had been nearly a year since his last paycheck. The construction company where he had spent 10 years of his life had shut down during the pandemic, leaving him and dozens of others adrift. Some of his coworkers had found other jobs, some had moved to different states, and some, like him, had been caught in the undertow of endless applications and interviews that ended with polite rejections. For Ethan, the challenge was greater. He wasn't just supporting himself. He was raising Lily alone, ever since cancer had taken her mother 2 years ago. He thought of her face that morning as she waved goodbye from the front steps, her little hand clutching a piece of paper she had drawn while he ironed his shirt. She had slipped it into his folder with a grin. "For luck," she said, her handwriting uneven across the page. He hadn't looked at it yet. He was saving it, like a spark he could strike when he needed light the most. Now, as the receptionist finally called his name, his breath caught. He rose stiffly, legs heavy as though the weight of every promise he had made to Lily clung to his ankles. He clutched the folder closer to his chest, straightened his shirt once more, and whispered to himself, "For her." Then, with a last glance at the glass doors that still offered escape, he walked toward the interview room, every step echoing louder than his heartbeat. "Mr. Miller, please take a seat." Olivia Carter's voice was even, professional, carrying across the long table with the authority of someone who decided fates between morning coffee and lunch. Ethan lowered himself into the chair, careful not to scrape it against the polished floor. The room felt colder than the lobby, the lights a shade too bright. 3 faces regarded him. Olivia in the center, composed behind a nameplate. To her left, a man in a silver tie tapping a capped pen. To her right, a woman with a tablet poised, stylus hovering like a judge's gavel. "Let's start with your recent experience," the man said, glancing at the resume. "Tell us about the construction firm." Ethan steadied his breath. "I worked there 10 years. Started as a laborer, studied on my own at night, moved into site coordination. Managed crews of 8 to 12 on rotating shifts. We finished a hospital expansion 3 weeks ahead of schedule." His voice was calm, but he could hear the faint tremor in it, like a wire under tension. Olivia's eyes didn't give anything away. "What would your former coworkers say is your strongest quality?" He swallowed. "I show up. When equipment failed at midnight, I drove across town with a replacement. When weather threatened to pour, I replanned the schedule and stayed until it set. I don't leave until the work is safe. He hesitated, then added, and I listen. People do better when they know they're heard. The woman with the tablet nodded without looking up. Describe a time you solved a problem under pressure. Ethan's hands warmed around the folder. We had a supplier delay that would have cost us a week. I called 3 smaller vendors, split the order, and staggered deliveries into the window we had. It meant I worked nights for 4 days, but we met the deadline. There was the first shift in the room, slight, almost imperceptible. Ethan caught it and tried not to cling to it. Your certifications, the man said, scanning. I see OSHA, some site safety credentials, but no formal project management certificate. Why not? Money, he thought. Time. Lily. I plan to take the exam, he said carefully. The company closed during the pandemic. I prioritized finding work. He inhaled once more, filling his lungs against the next question he knew was coming. Olivia set her pen down. There's a gap here, she said, gentle but direct. About a year. What happened during that period? His mouth went dry. This was the moment that tilted interviews one way or another. He could feel his heart tick faster, that old fear that the truth would sound like an excuse. I've been taking care of my daughter, he said. His voice thinned, cracked once, and he let it, refusing to make it sound stronger than it was. She's 6. Her mother passed away 2 years ago. It's just us. The room grew very still. The tablet stylus paused midair. The man's pen stopped tapping. In the center, Olivia's expression changed by a degree, something softer crossing her features, then returning to neutral. Thank you for sharing that, she said. No pity, no performance, just acknowledgement. The woman with the tablet cleared her throat. In this role, we need someone who can prioritize, manage shifting demands, and communicate across teams. Give an example of how you handled difficult feedback. Ethan nodded. On a school renovation, I pushed a crew too hard to recover time we'd lost to inspections. One of my guys told me I'd stop listening. He was right. I called a quick stand-up, owned it, and adjusted the plan. We rotated breaks, reassigned tasks to strengths, and finished with fewer errors. He glanced at Olivia. I keep the goal, but I don't ignore the people. They asked about software. He explained what he knew and what he'd taught himself since the layoffs. They asked about conflict. He described a heated dispute he defused by pulling 2 foremen into a hallway and letting each speak without interruption. He did not embellish. He did not pretend. He answered until he felt the answers fray at the edges, until his tongue stumbled over acronyms, until the room's perfect temperature felt like winter against his back. Finally, Olivia folded her hands. Do you have any questions for us? He had practiced one. What does success look like in the first 90 days? The words came out steadier than he felt. Olivia's mouth curved, not quite a smile. Clarity, consistency, and initiative. Learn the systems, build trust with your team, and raise your hand when you see a better way. He nodded. I can do those, he thought, though the silence that followed told him the room had already begun to close, the way interview rooms do, politely and invisibly, like theater lights dimming before the curtain falls. Thank you for your time, Mr. Miller, the man said, standing. The woman echoed him with a quiet, thank you, already saving the file on her tablet. Ethan rose, smoothing the front of his shirt as if that could smooth the outcome. He shook their hands, firm, respectful, and when he reached Olivia's, her grip was warm, steady. For a heartbeat, he thought she might say something else. She didn't. Professional distance returned to its post. He stepped into the corridor, the door whispering shut behind him. The hallway seemed longer now. He walked it anyway, each footfall a small reminder to keep moving. In his folder, the corner of Lily's drawing pressed against the paper like a heartbeat. He didn't take it out, not yet. He kept his eyes forward, rehearsing the words he would say if she asked from the window, "How was it, Daddy?" and trying to shape the truth into something that wouldn't dim her light. The corridor emptied into the lobby, and the change in sound was jarring. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, footsteps quick with purpose. Ethan's pace slowed, as if he no longer belonged to the current of movement around him. His shoulders sagged, the weight of the folder suddenly heavier than it had been when he walked in. Each reflection in the glass walls reminded him of the gap between who he was and who he thought he needed to be. At the revolving doors, he hesitated. He could almost see Lily's face pressed against their small living room window, waiting for him. "Daddy, did you get it?" Her voice lived in his mind, bright and eager, impossible to ignore. His hand slipped into the folder, fingers brushing the paper she had drawn that morning. He pulled it out. Crumpled from the squeeze of his grip, the childish handwriting tilted across the page. "Good luck, Daddy." A smiling face sat beside the words, lopsided but glowing with belief. He closed his eyes. That single piece of paper felt more valuable than any resume he had ever printed. The doors rotated, the city's noise rushing to meet him. Horns blared, conversations drifted from the sidewalk cafes, but all he heard was the thud of his own pulse. He folded the note carefully, sliding it into his pocket as though protecting it from the world. He had promised Lily ice cream if he got the job. The thought struck him like a stone in the gut. How could he walk home empty-handed again? How many times had he told her, "Tomorrow will be different," only to return with excuses he barely believed himself? His throat tightened, and he blinked hard against the sting in his eyes. On the street, he walked without seeing, each step heavier than the last. The traffic lights changed, people brushed past him with briefcases and paper cups, but he moved as if underwater, his mind replaying the questions from the panel. The stumble when he spoke about the gap in his employment. The way silence had grown after his confession about raising Lily alone. Failure didn't need words. It had a sound. The polite thank yous, the careful smiles that never reached the eyes. He had heard it too many times before. He rubbed his palm over his face, as though he could wipe away the image of Lily's small shoulders slumping when he told her the truth. She always tried to be brave for him. "It's okay, Daddy, you'll get the next one." But he had begun to wonder how many times a child's faith could be tested before it cracked. The buildings around him rose tall and gleaming, their windows reflecting the sun in sharp angles. To him, they looked like walls, impenetrable, built to keep men like him outside. His stride faltered, and for a moment, he considered turning back, marching into that office again, demanding a chance to prove himself. But what good would it do? He knew the outcome. He had felt it in the panel's silence. So he walked on, head lowered, one hand still pressed against the folded note in his pocket. Each step was a question he couldn't answer. What will I tell her? How do I keep promising when promises keep breaking? And then, footsteps behind him. At first, he ignored them. The city was full of echoes, of people in a hurry to places that had nothing to do with him. But the rhythm grew sharper, closer. "Mr. Miller, wait." The voice cut through the noise, firm yet softer than the interview room tone. He turned, slowly, uncertain if he had imagined it. Olivia Carter was there, striding toward him, her white suit bright against the gray concrete, her heels clicking a determined rhythm. She had left the panel. She had left the safety of the glass walls. And now she was here, outside, calling his name. Ethan froze where he stood, the folded paper in his hand suddenly warm. The crowd moved around them, but for the first time all morning, the city seemed to pause. Olivia Carter slowed as she reached him, the brisk rhythm of her heels softening on the pavement. For a moment, she wasn't the composed figure from behind the interview table. Her shoulders lowered, her eyes met his not as an evaluator, but as a person. "I saw that note," she said quietly, glancing at his hand. Ethan looked down. He hadn't realized he was still holding the folded paper. He opened his fist slightly, revealing the crumpled drawing, Lily's uneven letters, and lopsided smiley face. He swallowed, his voice barely rising above the traffic. "My daughter gave it to me this morning. Said it would bring me luck." Olivia nodded, her expression softening in a way that unsettled him. He was used to pity, to sympathetic smiles that meant nothing. But this wasn't that. Her gaze was steady, as if she were weighing something more important than a resume. "I could see you were nervous in there," she said. "Your answers weren't always sharp. But I also saw something else. A father who's been carrying the weight of his child's future. That speaks louder than anything you could put on paper." Her words sank into him, both comforting and painful. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, shaking his head. "I've failed too many times already. I can't keep telling her I'll do better tomorrow when tomorrow keeps ending like this." His voice cracked on the last word, and he turned slightly, ashamed to let her see the truth written across his face. But Olivia didn't step back. Instead, she spoke with a quiet conviction. "Do you know why I followed you out here?" He met her eyes, uncertain. "Why?" "Because I was raised by a single father," she said. Her voice carried a steadiness, but behind it was something raw. I remember the way he looked when he came home after another rejection. I remember the silence at dinner when he tried to protect me from it. I saw that same look on you just now. I know what it means to carry that weight, and I couldn't let you walk away thinking failure defines you. The world around them blurred, commuters rushing past, car horns in the distance. But all Ethan could focus on was the sincerity in her voice. For the first time in months, he felt understood. You don't know me, he said softly. No, she agreed. But I know what it is to grow up believing in someone who doesn't believe in themselves. And your daughter, she already believes in you. I think she's right. The words struck deep. He felt something stir inside him, something that had been buried under layers of exhaustion and rejection. Hope, fragile but alive. Olivia's expression shifted back toward the firmness he'd first seen in the interview room, though her tone stayed warm. I can't give you the position you applied for. It requires certifications and experience you don't have yet. But, she paused, measuring her words. I can offer you something else. A role in our operations team. It isn't glamorous, but it's steady, and it has a path upward. For a moment, Ethan couldn't find words. He blinked against the sudden rush of relief, the disbelief that someone was not only seeing him, but choosing him. You'd really give me that chance? Olivia smiled faintly. I'm not giving it to you, Mr. Miller. You've already earned it, by showing up for your daughter, by walking into that room when the world kept telling you no. That kind of strength? Companies need it. People respect it. I respect it. Ethan's chest tightened, but not with the familiar ache of disappointment. This was something warmer, steadier. He looked at the note in his hand, then back at her, his voice hushed but sure. Thank you. Olivia inclined her head, professional composure returning, though her eyes still held that glimmer of shared understanding. Don't thank me yet. Prove me right. For the first time that day, Ethan straightened not because he wanted to appear strong, but because he felt it. The note in his hand no longer seemed like a reminder of promises he couldn't keep. It felt like the beginning of one he finally could. For a moment, Ethan just stood there, the noise of the city rolling around him while Olivia's words hung between them like something fragile that could vanish if he breathed too hard. The exhaustion he'd carried into the building that morning hadn't left him, but now it was layered with something else, a cautious spark that felt almost dangerous to believe in. You'll have to prove yourself, Olivia said, her voice shifting back toward the careful precision of her role, though the warmth remained. Not in words. In action. The operations position is demanding. Long hours, tight deadlines. But it pays fairly, and it's a place to start. A place to climb from. Ethan tried to steady himself, to sort through the swirl in his chest. Operations, he repeated, as if the word itself needed to take shape in his mouth. It wasn't the managerial job he had dared to hope for, the one he had promised Lily would change everything. Yet the way Olivia spoke of it, the role wasn't a consolation prize. It was a doorway. I can do that, he said quietly, and then stronger. I will do that. Olivia studied him, her eyes narrowing just slightly, not with suspicion, but with the same careful attention she had given him in the interview room. Good, she said, because showing up matters. Not just once, but every day. That's what people remember. Her words pressed into him with the weight of truth. Showing up? He had been doing it for Lily every day since her mother passed. Packing her lunch, even when he hadn't eaten himself. Sitting through parent meetings with clothes he worried were too worn. Smiling at her from the bleachers while bills piled at home. He had been showing up all along. Now someone else was telling him it counted. Ethan nodded, gripping the folded drawing tighter. I can't promise I'll be perfect, he admitted, his voice low. But I can promise I won't quit. Olivia's mouth curved into the faintest smile, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. That's the promise that matters. A breeze pushed down the street, carrying with it the scent of roasted coffee from a corner cart. Ethan breathed it in, grounding himself. The crowd moved around them, strangers flowing past with their own stories, their own destinations. But for the first time in months, he didn't feel like an outsider in motion. He felt chosen. When do I start? He asked, the words almost foreign in his mouth after so many rejections. Olivia's answer came without hesitation. Monday. Report to the third floor at 8 sharp. You'll meet the team lead then. Monday. The single word rang inside him like a bell. He had a start date. He had something to tell Lily that wasn't another maybe or next time. Ethan exhaled, long and unsteady, then straightened his shoulders. "Thank you, Miss Carter." "Olivia," she corrected softly. "And don't waste the chance. Too many people don't get one." He met her gaze, and for a heartbeat, they stood in the noise of the city as two people bound by unspoken understanding. Her memory of a father who had tried, his reality of trying now. Then she nodded once, turned, and walked back toward the building, heels tapping against the pavement until she disappeared behind the glass doors. Ethan stayed where he was, the folded note burning warm in his palm. For the first time in a long while, the word tomorrow no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a promise. Ethan walked home with a small paper bag swinging from his hand, the tops of 2 ice cream cones peeking out, their paper sleeves already damp from the cold. It wasn't the job itself that had lightened his steps. It was the certainty. For the first time in months, he could bring Lily something more than excuses. The sun was dipping low, stretching long shadows across the cracked sidewalks of their neighborhood. The closer he got, the quicker his heart beat, not with nerves but with anticipation. He imagined her at the window, little face pressed against the glass, waiting. The thought alone carried him faster, until his boots struck a steady rhythm against the pavement. When he pushed open the door, the hinges gave their familiar creak, and before he could set the bag down, Lily came running. Her pigtails bounced with every hurried step, her socks slipping against the floorboards. She threw her arms around his waist. "Daddy, how was it?" Her voice was high and bright, full of unguarded hope. Ethan crouched down, the paper bag crinkling in his hand as he brought the cones into view. Lily gasped, eyes widening, her smile spreading so fast it almost undid him. He pressed one cone into her small hands. "You see this?" he said, pulling out the crumpled note she had given him that morning. He held it beside her ice cream. "Your good luck charm worked." Lily's mouth dropped open, and then she squealed, clutching the cone to her chest as though it were a trophy. "I knew it. I told you, Daddy. You're the best." He laughed softly, the sound breaking around the lump in his throat. He pulled her close, her little arms winding tightly around his neck. "I didn't get the big job I wanted," he admitted, voice trembling. "But I got something even better. A chance. A real chance." Lily leaned back just enough to look at him, her face sticky already from the melting ice cream. "Then that means we win," she said matter-of-factly, as though she had solved the whole puzzle of the world. Ethan kissed her temple, whispering into her hair, "We do, sweetheart. We're going to make it together." They sat at the kitchen table, the one scarred with scratches from years of use. Lily licked her cone happily, her legs swinging beneath her chair. Ethan's cone melted slowly in his hand, but he hardly noticed. He watched her, every smile, every sparkle in her eyes, and thought of Olivia's words, "Your daughter already believes in you." I think she's right. For the first time in so long, the heaviness in his chest eased. He didn't feel like a man defined by what he had lost. He felt like a father with something to build. That night, after Lily had curled beneath her blankets, still sticky from sugar and sleep, Ethan stood by her door, the crumpled drawing in his hand. He smoothed it against the frame and whispered to himself, "No more broken promises." And for the first time, he believed it. The weeks that followed were not easy. Ethan quickly discovered that the operations role demanded more of him than any job he had worked before. The hours stretched long, sometimes beginning before dawn and ending well past dark. He spent days on his feet, moving between warehouses and offices, learning systems he had never seen and handling tasks that tested every ounce of his endurance. But unlike the silence of unemployment, each day carried purpose. Every time he scanned his badge at the glass doors, he felt a flicker of pride. "I belong here." At home, exhaustion weighed on him, but Lily's joy never wavered. Each evening she waited by the window, face pressed against the glass, her small hand waving wildly the moment she spotted him on the sidewalk. That single gesture filled him with strength he didn't know he had left. He would scoop her into his arms despite aching muscles, breathing in the familiar scent of crayons and peanut butter, and think, "This is why." Slowly, his efforts began to show. He stayed late to master the software others avoided, volunteered for shifts no one wanted, and asked questions even when pride urged him to stay silent. Bit by bit, colleagues noticed. They began greeting him with respect instead of indifference, including him in conversations rather than overlooking him. One afternoon, months after that first interview, Olivia appeared at his desk. The sound of her heels still carried authority, but when she stopped beside him, her expression was no longer that of a distant interviewer. She looked at him with recognition. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice carrying a trace of warmth. "You've come a long way." Ethan looked up from the screen, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded. "Just trying to keep showing up." A faint smile touched her lips. "You've done more than that. You've proven yourself. Are you ready for the next step?" For a moment, he couldn't answer. The weight of every rejection. Every night he had stood in the kitchen counting coins for Lily's lunch. Every time he had told her tomorrow will be better. All of it rushed through him. But this time, tomorrow truly was better. He nodded slowly, his chest swelling with something he finally allowed himself to name: hope. Walking home that evening, he passed the same stretch of sidewalk where Olivia had called his name months ago. He reached into his wallet, pulling out the folded note Lily had drawn, now creased and worn from being carried every day. He smiled at it, then slipped it back carefully. The man who had once walked away from that building with nothing but disappointment now walked toward a future that was opening, one steady step at a time. Because he had learned something Lily had always known: no failure is final, no rejection the end. Sometimes, it only takes one person to believe in you, and the courage to keep going when the world tells you to stop.